She thought he was just another stranger offering pity to a drenched street singer. But when he shared his umbrella and asked her to sing, she never imagined her voice would follow him into boardrooms and headlines. Leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The rain hammered Seattle's concrete like bullets from heaven, each drop falling on the pavement in a symphony of chaos that perfectly matched Gwendolyn Harlan's shattered dreams. She pressed herself deeper into the shallow doorway of Morrison's vintage books, her guitar case clutched against her chest. 26 years old and invisible. That's what she'd become. Another faceless dreamer in a city that ate hope for breakfast and spat out broken souls by midnight. The neon signs reflected in puddles around her feet, creating fractured rainbows that reminded her of all the promises this place had once whispered in her ear. Make it here, and you'll make it anywhere. What a beautiful lie. Her fingers, numb from cold, struggled to keep her guitar case dry. Inside lay her most precious possession, a weathered acoustic guitar her grandmother had left her, along with a voice that could make angels weep and devils repent. But tonight, like every night for the past 3 months, nobody had stopped to listen. Nobody had dropped so much as a quarter into her open case. The city moved around her like she was a ghost. Umbrellas bobbed past like black flowers in a funeral procession, their owners buried in phones, schedules, and lives that mattered. She'd become part of the scenery, as invisible as the chipped paint on the bookstore's door. God, she whispered into the storm, her breath forming clouds that disappeared as quickly as her dreams. I'm drowning here. That's when she saw him. Ellery Gareth moved through the rain like he owned it. While everyone else hunched and hurried, he walked with the confidence. His brown suit was perfectly tailored. His leather shoes looked foreign, and the umbrella in his hand looked like it had been crafted by artisans who understood that some people were born to stay dry. He should have walked past her. They always did. But he stopped. You look like you could use this more than I do, he said, his voice cutting through the rain with surprising warmth. He held out his umbrella, not the cheap kind that flipped inside out at the first strong wind, but something elegant and substantial. Gwendolyn stared at him with suspicion. In her experience, when beautiful strangers offered help, they usually wanted something in return. What's the catch? No catch. His smile was crooked, boyish despite the expensive suit. Just a dry umbrella and a storm that won't last forever. She wanted to refuse. Pride was about all she had left, and accepting charity from Mr. Perfect would chip away another piece of her soul. But her guitar case was getting heavier, and her jacket was soaked through to her bones. Fine. She took the umbrella, their fingers brushing for just a moment. His hands were warm and soft. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, he said, stepping back into the rain. Water immediately began darkening his expensive suit, but he didn't seem to care. Wait until you see what I'm asking for in return. Her stomach dropped. Here it comes, she thought. The proposition. The assumption that a broke street singer would do anything for a few bills. I want you to sing. What? Right here, right now. He gestured to the rain-slick street as if it were Carnegie Hall. One song, that's all. Of all the things she'd expected, this wasn't it. You're crazy. It's pouring rain, and nobody. I'm not nobody, he said simply. And I'm asking. There was something in his eyes. Not pity, not the clinical interest of someone slumming for entertainment. Something deeper, hungrier. Like a man dying of thirst who'd just found water. Against every rational thought screaming in her head, Gwendolyn found herself setting down her guitar case and opening it. The instrument gleamed, despite the dim streetlight, its worn wood telling stories of 1,000 songs, 1,000,000 dreams. She pulled it out, feeling the familiar weight settle against her body like coming home. The rain drummed against the umbrella above her head, his umbrella, his gift, his strange request echoing in the storm. Any requests? She asked, surprised by her own boldness. Whatever moves you. Whatever moves you. When was the last time someone had asked her that? Her booking agents wanted crowd pleasers. The few bars that let her play wanted covers. Everyone wanted her to be someone else's voice. But this stranger, this beautiful, expensive, impossible man, wanted to hear her. The first notes floated from her guitar like prayers, delicate and questioning. Then her voice joined them, low and smoky, telling the story of every broken dream that had brought her to this moment. I've been walking through the rain so long I forgot what sunshine feels like on my skin. Every door I've knocked upon stays locked from within. But tonight, beneath a stranger's shelter, I remember who I used to be, before the world told me I wasn't worth believing in. The song poured out of her like water from a broken dam, all the loneliness, the fear, the desperate hope she carried like stones in her chest. She sang for every dreamer who'd ever stood in the rain, wondering if they were meant for more. She sang for the girl who'd come to Seattle with stars in her eyes and empty pockets full of ambition. She sang for him, this stranger who'd stopped when everyone else kept walking. When the last note faded into the storm, the silence between them was profound. He stood completely soaked, water dripping from his dark hair, and she realized he was staring at her like she'd just performed magic. Jesus, he breathed. Jesus, that was what? The vulnerability in her voice surprised them both. But before he could answer, his phone buzzed. His face shifted back to the polished mask of someone important, someone needed elsewhere. I have to go. He looked at her one last time, memorizing something. Keep the umbrella. Seattle rain isn't going anywhere. Wait, she called as he turned to leave. I don't even know your name. He paused, half turned back to her, rain streaming down his face like tears. For a moment, she thought he might say something that would change everything. Instead, he just smiled that crooked smile. Maybe that's better for now. And then he was gone, disappearing into the storm like he'd never been there at all. Gwendolyn stood alone under his umbrella, holding her guitar, wondering if she just imagined the whole impossible encounter. But the umbrella was real, expensive, elegant. And when she looked closer, she found initials monogrammed in subtle silver thread. EGEG had listened to her sing like her voice mattered, like she mattered. For the first time in months, Gwendolyn Harlan smiled. The morning after the storm, Seattle wore its usual gray like a comfortable old sweater. Gwendolyn sat in grind coffee, nursing a cup of the cheapest thing on the menu and trying to convince herself that last night had actually happened. The umbrella leaned against her chair, proof that she hadn't dreamed up her mysterious benefactor. She'd barely slept, her mind replaying the moment over and over. The way he'd looked at her while she sang. The way he'd said Jesus, like she'd just revealed something sacred. The way he'd walked into the rain like getting soaked was a small price to pay for hearing her voice. Get a grip, she told herself, stirring her coffee with unnecessary violence. He was probably drunk. Rich guys do random charitable acts when they're drunk. It doesn't mean anything. But her guitar case felt different this morning. Lighter somehow, as if being truly heard had burned away some weight she'd been carrying. Excuse me, is this seat taken? Gwendolyn looked up, and her heart skipped. It felt like it almost stopped. E.G. stood next to her table, looking nothing like the rain-soaked stranger from the night before. In daylight, he was devastating. Crisp white shirt, navy jacket, and those same warm eyes that had watched her sing like she was the only person in the world. Are you stalking me? The words tumbled out before she could stop them. His laugh was rich, genuine. That's a hell of a way to greet someone who gave you his umbrella. That's a hell of a way to avoid answering the question. But she gestured to the empty chair across from her, her pulse hammering like it was trying to escape her body. He sat down, and suddenly the small cafe table felt too small. Dangerous. Fine. Yes, I'm stalking you. I asked around, found out you come here most mornings. I bribed the barista for information. Her eyes widened. Seriously? No. Another crooked grin. But the panic in your eyes was worth the lie. I live 3 blocks away. I come here every morning. This is just coincidence masquerading as fate. You live in Queen Anne? The words slipped out before she could stop them. Queen Anne was where Seattle's wealthy came to play house, with views of Elliott Bay and price tags that made normal people weep. Guilty as charged. He didn't seem embarrassed by his privilege, but he didn't flaunt it either. Let me guess. You think I'm a spoiled rich boy who's never worked a day in his life? Are you? Partially. His honesty was disarming. But I also think you're a broke artist who believes the world owes her something just because she can sing. Gwendolyn's mouth fell open. "Excuse me? See? We both make assumptions." He leaned back in his chair, studying her with those eyes. "The difference is, I heard you sing last night. So I know I'm wrong about the 'just because she can sing' part. You don't just sing, you bleed music." "There's a difference," she blushed. Nobody had ever described her voice like that. "Why did you ask me to sing?" The question had been burning in her chest all night. "Really? No bullshit." His expression grew serious. "You want the truth? Your song kept me awake all night. I couldn't stop thinking about it. About you." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about anything in years. My brain doesn't work that way anymore. But your voice, it woke something up." The coffee shop faded around them. Conversations became white noise. The world narrowed to just this table, this moment, this impossible man telling her that she'd woken something in him. "I don't even know your name," she whispered. "Ellery." He extended his hand across the table. "Ellery Gareth." She took his hand. "Gwendolyn Harland." "Gwendolyn." He said her name like he was tasting it. "It suits you, old-fashioned, but with steel underneath." They sat there holding hands across a coffee shop table, and Gwendolyn felt like she was balanced on the edge of something enormous, something that could save her or destroy her completely. "I have a proposition for you," Ellery said, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. Her heart stopped. "What kind of proposition?" "I'm hosting a dinner party this weekend. Small group, influential people. I want you to perform." She pulled her hand back like he'd burned her. "You want me to be the entertainment. I want you to share your gift with people who have the power to change your life. How do you know they'll even like what I do?" "Because I like what you do." He said it with such simple confidence that it stole her breath. "And my opinion tends to carry weight in certain circles." Certain circles. God, he really was from a different world. What circles would those be exactly? The kind where careers get made over dessert and champagne. Gwendolyn's pride warred with her desperation. Her rent was 3 weeks overdue. Her credit cards were maxed out. She'd been living on ramen and stubbornness for so long she'd forgotten what real food tasted like. But this felt like charity. Elegant, expensive charity. "I don't need your pity," she said quietly. "Good, because I'm not offering pity." Ellery leaned forward, intensity radiating from him like heat. "I'm offering opportunity." "There's a difference. How do I know you're not just some rich guy playing with the poor street singer for kicks?" Something flickered in his eyes. Hurt, maybe, or recognition. "You don't. You'll have to trust me." Trust. What a luxury. What a risk. "What's in it for you?" she asked. "Maybe I just want to hear you sing again." Nobody's that altruistic. "Maybe I'm hoping you'll prove me wrong about broke artists who think the world owes them something." Despite herself, Gwendolyn laughed. "You're an asshole." "I prefer charmingly direct." His smile was pure mischief. "So? Will you do it?" She studied his face, looking for signs of deception, manipulation, the predatory gleam she'd learned to recognize in men who thought her desperation made her available. Instead, she found curiosity and something that looked almost like hope. "Fine," she heard herself say, "but I choose the songs." "Deal." He stood, pulling out his wallet. "Saturday night, 8 o'clock. I'll text you the address. I didn't give you my number. You will." The confidence in his voice should have been infuriating. Instead, it was oddly thrilling. Against all logic, she found herself rattling off her digits while he typed them into his phone. "One more thing," he said, pocketing the device. "Dress nice. These people notice everything." And then he was gone again, leaving her sitting in a coffee shop with racing pulse and the distinct feeling that her life had just taken a sharp turn into unknown territory. Her phone buzzed 30 seconds later, looking forward to Saturday. "Don't let me down." Gwendolyn stared at the message, her stomach doing complicated acrobatics. She had 3 days to figure out what the hell she was doing, what to wear, and what songs could possibly be worthy of whatever world Ellery Gareth inhabited. 3 days to decide whether she was about to be rescued or destroyed. Outside, Seattle's drizzle painted the windows, and Gwendolyn found herself smiling despite every rational thought in her head. Maybe, just maybe, this was her moment. The address Ellery had texted led to a penthouse that looked like it had been ripped from the pages of Architectural Digest and suspended above Seattle like a glass jewel. Gwendolyn stood in the lobby, clutching her guitar case and fighting the urge to run. She'd spent her last $30 on a black dress from a thrift store, but standing here among the crystal chandeliers and imported stone, she felt like a fraud. The security guard had looked at her twice before calling upstairs, his expression suggesting she might be lost. "You don't belong here," whispered the voice in her head that sounded suspiciously like her mother. "Girls like us don't get invited to places like this." But Ellery's text had been clear: penthouse level. Ask for me. Can't wait to hear you sing. The elevator ride to the top floor felt like ascending to heaven or climbing the gallows. Her reflection in the polished metal doors showed a young woman trying desperately to look confident, but her eyes betrayed her terror. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse, and Gwendolyn stared in awe. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased Seattle's glittering skyline. The Space Needle looked close enough to touch. The sound system was better than most concert venues. And the people. Beautiful people. Powerful people. The kind of people who shaped the world with their checkbooks and connections. Women in designer gowns that cost a fortune. Men who carried themselves like they'd never heard the word no. This was Ellery's world. Gwendolyn. She turned, and there he was, devastating in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, moving toward her with that confident stride that suggested he owned every room he entered, which, given the penthouse, he probably did. "You look beautiful," he said, taking her hand and kissing her cheek. The gesture was casual, but it sent heat spiraling through her body. "I look terrified," she whispered. "That too." His smile was warm, reassuring. But beautiful terror is still beautiful. Before she could respond, a woman in a beautiful dress appeared beside them. She was stunning in that polished, untouchable way that suggested extensive personal training, professional styling, and the kind of confidence that came from never wanting for anything. "Ellery, darling," the woman purred, her eyes sliding over Gwendolyn with barely concealed disdain. "Who's your little friend?" "Victoria, meet Gwendolyn Harland. She's performing tonight." "How quaint." Victoria's smile could have frozen champagne. "I didn't realize we were having entertainment." The word, entertainment, fell from her lips like an insult. Gwendolyn felt herself shrinking, becoming invisible again. Just another servant, another hired help to be dismissed and forgotten. But Ellery's hand tightened around hers. "Gwendolyn is an artist," he said firmly, "and you're about to discover why I asked her here." The conversation continued around her, but Gwendolyn barely heard it. She was too busy cataloging all the ways she didn't belong. Her thrift store dress, her scuffed shoes, her guitar case that looked ancient next to all this gleaming perfection. What am I doing here? The question screamed in her head as Ellery led her through the crowd, introducing her to names she recognized from magazine covers and society pages. These weren't just rich people. These were moguls, influencers, the invisible hands that moved Seattle's cultural machinery. And they all looked at her like she was a fascinating zoo animal. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ellery called, his voice carrying easily across the penthouse, "if I could have your attention for a moment." The room quieted, 24 pairs of eyes focusing on the makeshift stage area Ellery had created near the windows. Gwendolyn felt exposed, pinned like a butterfly under glass. "I'd like you to meet someone extraordinary," Ellery continued. "Gwendolyn Harland possesses something rare in our world, a voice that can change everything. I hope you'll listen with the same wonder I felt when I first heard her sing." He looked at her then, his eyes full of encouragement and something deeper. Something that looked like pride. "Don't let me down," his expression seemed to say. But more importantly, don't lay yourself down. Gwendolyn walked to the small performance area on unsteady legs. Her guitar felt impossibly heavy as she pulled it from its case. The room was silent, except for the soft clink of champagne glasses and the whispers in the crowd. She looked out at the assembled crowd, titans of industry, society mavens. People who could make or break careers with a single word, and felt her voice desert her completely. "I can't do this." But then she saw Ellery standing at the back of the room, his eyes locked on hers with absolute faith. He nodded once, barely perceptible, and suddenly she could breathe again. "Sing for him," she told herself. "Forget everyone else. Just sing for him." The first notes trembled from her guitar, uncertain and fragile. Then her voice joined them, tentative at first, testing the acoustics of this impossible room. But as the song built, something shifted. The melody wrapped around the space, and her voice grew stronger, surer. She sang about dreams deferred and chances taken, about the courage to stand in rooms where you don't belong and demand to be heard anyway. The crowd faded away. The expensive penthouse became just another venue. There was only the music, only the story she was telling with every note, every breath. When the last chord died away, the silence was profound. Then someone started clapping, not the polite, restrained applause she'd expected, but genuine, enthusiastic appreciation. Others joined in, and suddenly the room was filled with the sound of approval, of recognition. "Magnificent," breathed a woman near the front, someone Gwendolyn recognized as the head of a major recording label. "Absolutely magnificent." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions, business cards, and opportunities that seemed too good to be true. People who'd looked through her before were suddenly fascinated by her story, her sound, her potential. But through it all, Gwendolyn couldn't shake the feeling that she was performing in someone else's life, that at any moment, the spell would break and she'd be back on the street, invisible and ignored. Near midnight, as the crowd began to thin, she found herself alone on the balcony, staring out at the city lights below. The cool air felt good against her skin, a relief from the overwhelming heat of being the center of attention. Having second thoughts? Ellery appeared beside her, 2 glasses of champagne in his hands. "I feel like Cinderella," she admitted, accepting the champagne. "Like this is all going to disappear at midnight." "Why would it disappear?" "Because I'm not supposed to be here." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "Look at me, Ellery, really look at me. I'm nobody. A failed street singer with a guitar and impossible dreams. These people, they live in a different universe." "You're right," he said simply. "They do live in a different universe. A universe where passion gets buried under profit margins and art becomes commodity. You know what you brought to that room tonight? Something they've forgotten exists. Authenticity. Raw, undeniable talent that can't be manufactured or bought." He moved closer, his voice dropping to something intimate and warm. "Do you know why I invited you here? Not because I felt sorry for you. Because you reminded me what music is supposed to sound like when it comes from the soul instead of a boardroom." "But I don't know how to be this person," she whispered. "I don't know how to navigate their world." "Then don't." His hand found hers on the balcony railing. "Stay exactly who you are. Let them come to you." The champagne bubbles tickled her nose as she sipped, trying to process the evening. 3 people gave me their cards tonight. Real cards, from real labels." "And you're surprised?" "I'm terrified." She turned to face him fully. "What if I'm not as good as you think I am? What if tonight was just, I don't know, a fluke?" Ellery set down his champagne glass and cupped her face in his hands. His touch was gentle, but his eyes were fierce with conviction. "Gwendolyn, I've spent years around artists, manufactured, processed, perfect artists who sing like angels and feel like nothing. You sing like you're the music. That's not something you can fake or lose or suddenly not be good enough for. That's who you are." Standing there in his hands, Seattle sparkling below them, Gwendolyn felt something shift. Not just hope. She'd carried hope like a poisonous thing for years. This was different. This was possibility made real, dreams given weight and substance. "Thank you," she whispered, "for tonight, for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." "Don't thank me yet," he said, echoing his words from that first night in the rain. "We're just getting started." But even as he said it, even as she let herself imagine a future where her voice mattered, where she belonged in rooms like this, a small part of her wondered what Ellery Gareth was getting out of all this generosity. In her experience, when things seemed too good to be true, they usually were. 3 weeks after the Penthouse performance, Gwendolyn's life had transformed into something she barely recognized. The business cards from that night had turned into meetings, the meetings into offers, and the offers into the kind of opportunities she'd only dreamed about. She'd signed with Morrison Records, not the biggest label, but respected, artistic, the kind of place that let musicians make music instead of products. Her advance check sat in her bank account like proof that miracles existed, enough to pay her back rent and buy groceries that didn't come in packages marked ramen. But the best part wasn't the money or the sudden interest from industry professionals. The best part was Ellery. They'd been spending time together. Not dates exactly, but something more intimate than friendship. Coffee meetings that stretched into long walks through Pike Place Market. Late-night conversations on his balcony, where she'd play new songs and he'd listen with that focus that made her feel like the only person in the world. He was teaching her to navigate his world, introducing her to the right people, opening doors she didn't even know existed. But more than that, he was becoming someone she could trust. Someone who saw her not as a project or charity case, but as a partner in creating something beautiful, which is why the news felt like a physical blow. Gwendolyn stared at the newspaper stand outside grind coffee, her blood turning to ice in her veins. The headline screamed across the front page of Seattle's most notorious gossip rag. Millionaire Gareth's new charity case. Below it, a grainy photo of her and Ellery leaving a restaurant the night before, her hand in his, both of them laughing at something he'd said. The image had been cropped to make it look intimate, romantic, like evidence of some sordid affair. But it was the subheadline that made her stomach drop. Philanthropist Ellery Gareth's latest project. From street singer to record deal in 3 weeks. With shaking hands, she bought the paper and read the article right there on the sidewalk, each word a fresh wound. Sources close to Gareth confirmed that the struggling street performer caught his attention during one of his notorious charity walks through Seattle's grittier neighborhoods. Ellery has always had a soft spot for down-and-out artists, says a former associate, but this girl really pulled at his heartstrings. He couldn't resist playing fairy godfather, the unnamed singer, identified only as a Gwendolyn H. Went from busking for quarters to signing a record deal after Gareth introduced her to industry contacts at a private dinner party. It's classic Ellery, our source continues. He loves playing savior to broken birds. The question is, what happens when he gets bored and moves on to the next charity case? The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. Every horrible thought she'd tried to suppress came flooding back. Every moment of doubt, every whispered fear that she was just another rich man's pet project, crystallized into devastating clarity. Charity case. The words echoed in her head as she stumbled back to her apartment. Broken bird. Everything she'd feared was true. She wasn't talented. She was pitiable. She wasn't an artist. She was entertainment for a bored millionaire with a savior complex. Her phone rang as she climbed the stairs to her building, Ellery's name flashing on the screen. She let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. And again. By the time she reached her door, he'd called 6 times. She turned off the phone and collapsed on her couch, clutching the newspaper like evidence of her own stupidity. How had she been so naive? How had she let herself believe that someone like Ellery Gareth could see anything in someone like her beyond a feel-good story to tell at cocktail parties? The philanthropist and his latest project. Charity case. Down-and-out artist. Each phrase was perfectly crafted to humiliate, to reduce everything she'd accomplished to nothing more than pity disguised as opportunity. 3 weeks of feeling like she mattered, like she belonged, like she had something valuable to offer the world, all of it built on lies. A knock at her door made her jump. "Gwendolyn," Ellery's voice, muffled but unmistakably concerned. "Open the door. I know you're in there." She considered hiding, pretending she wasn't home. But anger was rising in her chest now, hot and righteous and demanding release. She yanked the door open, the newspaper still clutched in her hand. "Charity case?" she spat before he could speak. "Really? That's what I am to you?" Ellery looked stricken, his usually perfect appearance disheveled. His hair was messed up like he'd been running his hands through it, his expensive shirt wrinkled. "Gwendolyn, that article is bullshit. Complete fabrication designed to what? Tell the truth?" She shoved the paper at his chest. 3 weeks, Ellery. 3 weeks from street singer to record deal. Don't you think that looks a little suspicious? Don't you think people might wonder what I did to earn such generous patronage? You earned it with your voice, with your talent. Did I? Or did I earn it by being pathetic enough to catch the attention of Seattle's most eligible philanthropist? The words poured out of her like poison, bitter and vile. Tell me, how many other broken birds have you rescued? How many other charity cases have you set up with record deals? You're not a charity case, he said quietly. You never were. Then what am I? Her voice cracked, years of accumulated pain and insecurity bleeding through. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I'm exactly what that article says I am. A pity project for a rich man with too much money and too much guilt. Something flickered in Ellery's eyes. Hurt, frustration, and something else she couldn't identify. Is that really what you think of me? That I'm some kind of predator who gets off on manipulating desperate artists? I don't know what to think anymore. Tears were streaming down her face now, hot and humiliating. All I know is that I felt like something special for the first time in my life, and now I find out it was all just charity. It wasn't charity. Then what was it? She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more venom than screaming. What do you get out of this, Ellery? What's your angle? Because nobody does what you've done without wanting something in return. For a moment, she thought he might tell her. The truth flickered across his face like lightning, vulnerable, desperate, achingly real. But then his mask slipped back into place, and she saw him retreat behind the polished wall of wealth and control. I wanted to help someone with extraordinary talent reach her potential, he said carefully. That's all. That's all. The dismissal in those words hit her like a slap. Not because she meant something to him, not because her voice had moved him, or her company had become precious to him. Just business, just charity, just helping the poor street singer fulfill her potential. Get out, she whispered. Gwendolyn, get out, she screamed. Get out and don't come back. Find another charity case to save. I'm done being your pet project. He stood there for another heartbeat, looking like he wanted to say something that might change everything. Instead, he just nodded once and walked away. Gwendolyn slammed the door and collapsed against it, sobbing with the kind of devastation that comes from losing something you never really had. The newspaper lay scattered on her floor, its headlines taunting her with the truth she'd been too stupid to see. She'd let herself believe in fairy tales. She'd let herself think that talent and dreams were enough, that someone like Ellery Gareth could see something worthwhile in someone like her. But fairy tales were for other people, people who belonged in penthouses and wore designer dresses without feeling like imposters. People who didn't have to wonder what hidden price came attached to every kindness. People who weren't charity cases. That night, for the first time since meeting Ellery, Gwendolyn didn't dream of stages and spotlights. She dreamed of rain, endless rain, and the sound of her own voice disappearing into the storm. 2 months later, Gwendolyn was performing at Murphy's Tavern, a dive bar on the wrong side of Capitol Hill, where the stage was a raised platform in the corner and the audience consisted mostly of drunks who talked through every song. It was a far cry from Ellery's penthouse, but it was honest work. No charity, no pity, just her voice, her guitar, and whatever tips landed in the jar beside her microphone. She'd returned the record advance. Every penny. The check had sat in her drawer for weeks, taunting her, but ultimately, she couldn't keep money that felt like payment for being pathetic. Morrison Records had been understanding, if disappointed. Apparently, walking away from opportunities out of wounded pride was more common than she'd thought. Now, she was back where she started, invisible, ignored, earning barely enough to cover rent, but at least she was earning it honestly. She was halfway through a Joni Mitchell cover when she noticed him. Ellery sat at a corner table, still devastatingly handsome but somehow diminished. His expensive suit looked out of place among Murphy's regular clientele of construction workers and night shift nurses, but he didn't seem to care. He was staring at her with that same focused intensity she remembered, like she was the only thing in the room worth seeing. Her voice wavered, the lyrics catching in her throat. What was he doing here? How had he even found her? She finished the song, her eyes never leaving his face. He didn't applaud, didn't smile, just watched her with an expression she couldn't read. When she announced her break, he was already standing. "We need to talk," he said as she stepped off the small stage. "No, we don't." She brushed past him, heading for the bar. "I thought I made that clear 2 months ago." "Gwendolyn, please." His hand caught her arm, gentle but insistent. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." The bartender, Murphy himself, a grizzled ex-Marine who'd taken a protective interest in her, looked over with raised eyebrows. She shook her head slightly, letting him know she was okay, even though her heart was beating fast. Fine, 5 minutes, but not here. She didn't want Murphy's customers to witness whatever confrontation was about to happen. They stepped outside into the alley behind the bar, where the smell of garbage and Seattle's eternal dampness created an atmosphere about as far from Ellery's penthouse as possible. Fitting, considering how far she'd fallen. "You look tired," he said softly. "You look like you're slumming." The words came out harsher than she intended, but she didn't take them back. "What do you want, Ellery?" "I want to explain." "Explain what?" "How I was your charity case? How you got bored and moved on to the next broken bird? Trust me, I figured it out." Something flashed in his eyes. Pain, maybe, or frustration. "That article was planted by someone in my organization, someone who wanted to drive a wedge between us. Well, congratulations to them. Mission accomplished." "My assistant," he continued, ignoring her sarcasm. "Victoria's cousin, actually. She'd been feeding information to the tabloids for months, hoping to sabotage anyone who got close to me. I fired her, but the damage was already done." Gwendolyn felt a flicker of something. Hope? Vindication? But pushed it down. Even if that's true, it doesn't change anything. The core of what they wrote. It was accurate, wasn't it? "You did find me on the street. You did use your connections to get me opportunities I never could have earned on my own. Is that what you think happened? Isn't it?" Ellery was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the dim light from the bar's shining sign. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. "That first night, when I heard you sing in the rain, something broke open in me, something I'd kept locked away for years." He leaned against the brick wall, suddenly looking exhausted. "I grew up poor, Gwendolyn. Really poor. My mother cleaned office buildings at night and waited tables during the day just to keep us fed. I know what it feels like to be invisible, to have talent that no one wants to see because you don't come from the right background." She stared at him. In all their conversations, he'd never mentioned his childhood, his background. She'd assumed he was born wealthy, born into privilege. "When I made my first million," he continued, "I swore I'd never let another talented person get overlooked the way I was. So yes, I've helped artists. Dozens of them. But none of them," he paused, running a hand through his hair, "none of them made me feel like I was drowning and being saved at the same time." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means that helping you was never charity, it was selfish." He looked at her directly, his eyes vulnerable in a way that made her chest tight. "I didn't want to save you, Gwendolyn. I wanted to be near you. I wanted to hear you sing every day for the rest of my life. I wanted to watch you succeed because your success would mean you'd stay in my world." The words piercing through her. All this time, she'd been so focused on her own pride, her own fear of being pitied, that she'd never considered he might have his own vulnerabilities, his own fears. "I wanted to be worthy of you," he whispered, "and the only way I knew how to do that was to give you what you deserved, a chance to be heard." Gwendolyn felt tears prick her eyes. "Ellery, I know I handled it wrong. I know I should have told you how I felt instead of hiding behind professional gestures, but I was terrified that if you knew I was falling in love with you, you'd think that was the only reason I was helping." falling in love with you. The words hung in the air between them like a bridge she was afraid to cross. Because if she stepped onto it, if she let herself believe him, she'd be vulnerable all over again. She'd be risking everything on the possibility that this beautiful, impossible man could actually see something in her worth loving. The news was right about one thing, she said quietly. I am a charity case. I'm broke. I'm struggling. I don't belong in your world. Stop. He stepped closer, his voice fierce. Just stop. You think I care about money? About what world you come from? I've been surrounded by wealthy, polished, perfectly acceptable people my entire adult life, and not one of them has ever made me feel like you do. How do I make you feel? Like I'm alive again, like music matters, like there's something in this world worth fighting for beyond profit margins and board meetings. He cupped her face in his hands, the same gesture from that night on the balcony, but more desperate now. You make me feel like the man I was before I learned to be careful with my heart. Standing in that alley, looking into his eyes, Gwendolyn felt something shift inside her chest. The walls she'd built, the armor she'd wrapped around her wounded pride began to crack. I was so scared, she whispered. Scared that I wasn't good enough, that it was all too good to be true. When I saw that article, it confirmed every horrible thing I'd ever thought about myself. You're the most talented person I've ever met, the most genuine, the most... He trailed off, searching for words. You're extraordinary, Gwendolyn, not because I helped you, because of who you are when you sing, when you laugh, when you get angry at the world for not seeing what I see. What do you see? Everything. His thumb brushed away a tear she didn't realize had fallen. I see everything. And then he was kissing her, soft and desperate and tasting like hope. She melted into him, her hands fisting in his expensive shirt, all her anger and pride and stubborn independence dissolving into this moment of perfect clarity. This was what she'd been afraid of. Not charity, not pity. This, the possibility of being loved not despite her struggles, but because of her strength in facing them. The possibility of mattering to someone not as a project, but as a partner. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Gwendolyn felt like she was seeing clearly for the first time in months. I returned the advance, she said. I know. Morrison told me. His smile was soft, proud. Stubborn as hell, but I expected that. I thought you'd be angry. I was impressed. Anyone can take help gracefully. It takes real strength to walk away from it when you think it compromises who you are. They stood there in the alley, holding each other, and Gwendolyn felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the possibility of being understood, of being seen not as a problem to solve, but as a person to love. What happens now? She asked. Now we do this right, Ellery said. We start over, not as patron and artist, but as partners. Your voice, my resources, our dream. What if I'm not ready? What if I screw it up again? Then we'll screw it up together. He kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent. But Gwendolyn, you're going to be magnificent, with or without my help. I just want the privilege of watching it happen. As they walked back into Murphy's Tavern together, Gwendolyn felt her world shifting again. But this time, it didn't feel like falling. It felt like flying. 1 year later, Gwendolyn stood backstage at the Paramount Theater, her hands shaking as she adjusted her guitar strap. The venue was sold out, 800 seats filled with people who'd come specifically to hear her sing. Her album, Rain Songs, had debuted at number 3 on the Billboard charts. Rolling Stone had called her a voice for the voiceless. NPR had featured her story as an example of authentic artistry surviving in an industry obsessed with manufactured talent. But none of that mattered right now. Right now, she was just a girl from nowhere, about to walk onto the biggest stage of her life, terrified she might forget the words or miss a chord or somehow prove that she'd been a fraud all along. 5 minutes, Ms. Harland, the stage manager called. 5 minutes until everything she'd ever dreamed of became reality. Through a gap in the curtain, she could see the audience, a sea of faces illuminated by the soft amber lighting. Somewhere in that crowd sat industry executives, music journalists, and fellow artists. Somewhere out there sat her future, and in the front row, reserved seating, sat Ellery. He'd been there for every milestone over the past year. Every recording session where she'd struggled to capture the raw emotion of her street performances in a sterile studio environment. Every meeting with executives who still occasionally looked at her like she might be a fluke. Every moment of doubt when she'd wondered if she really belonged in this world she was slowly learning to navigate. He'd never tried to manage her career or influence her choices. Instead, he'd become her anchor, the person who reminded her that success without authenticity was just expensive emptiness. When the label had wanted to polish her sound, make it more radio-friendly, he'd encouraged her to fight for the artistic vision that had drawn people to her in the first place. "Your voice is perfect because it's yours," he'd told her during one particularly heated debate with the producers. "Don't let them turn you into everyone else." Their relationship had evolved slowly, carefully, both of them learning to trust not just each other but the possibility that something real could exist between two people from such different worlds. He'd moved out of his penthouse, choosing a more modest house in Wallingford, where she felt comfortable. She'd learned to accept his help without feeling diminished by it, understanding finally that partnership meant leveraging each other's strengths, not maintaining artificial equality in every single transaction. They'd written songs together, his business acumen helping her understand the industry, while her artistic vision reminded him why music mattered in the first place. Some of her best tracks had emerged from late-night conversations on his couch, her guitar in her lap, his laptop open beside them as they crafted lyrics that bridged their two worlds. But tonight was different. Tonight wasn't about their partnership or her career or the strange journey that had brought them together. Tonight was about proving to herself that she belonged here, that she could command a stage this size and hold an audience this large with nothing but her voice and the story she carried. "Places, everyone!" Gwendolyn took a deep breath, said a quick prayer to whatever gods looked after struggling artists, and walked into the lights. The first song went perfectly. Her voice filled the vast space, reaching every corner of the theater with a kind of clarity and power that reminded everyone why they'd come. By the third song, she could feel the audience settling into that rare state of complete attention. 800 people breathing together, listening as one organism. This was what she dreamed of, not the fame or the money, but this, the moment when music became communion, when her voice became a bridge between her heart and everyone else's. She was halfway through her set, deep in the groove of performing for people who genuinely wanted to hear what she had to say, when she spotted something that made her pause. In the front row, Ellery wasn't in his seat. Instead, he was standing at the edge of the stage, still devastatingly handsome in his dark suit, but looking nervous in a way she'd never seen before. In his hands was a microphone. The band noticed her distraction and began to fade out the current song. The audience stirred, sensing something unplanned was happening. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ellery said, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "I hope you'll forgive the interruption, but I have something important to ask." A murmur went through the crowd. Gwendolyn stared at him, her heart starting to pound for reasons that had nothing to do with stage fright. "A little over a year ago," Ellery continued, "I was walking through the rain when I heard a voice that changed my life. Not just because it was beautiful, though it was. Not just because it was powerful, though it certainly was that too. It changed my life because it reminded me that some things in this world are worth believing in." He looked up at her, his eyes warm and nervous and full of love. "Gwendolyn Harlan taught me that talent isn't about perfection. It's about truth. She taught me that success isn't about having everything. It's about sharing what you have. She taught me that love isn't about finding someone who fits into your world. It's about building a world together." The theater was completely silent now, 800 people holding their breath. "So I have a proposal," Ellery said, his voice shaking slightly. "Not just for Gwendolyn, but for everyone here tonight who believes in the power of music to change lives." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something that made Gwendolyn's knees go weak, a small velvet box. "Gwendolyn Harlan," he said, dropping to one knee right there in front of God and everyone. You've spent your life using your voice to lift others up. Will you let me spend the rest of my life lifting you up? Will you marry me?" The world seemed to stop. The stage lights, the audience, the vastness of the theater. Everything faded except for this moment, this man, this impossible question, being asked in front of 800 witnesses. Gwendolyn looked down at him, this beautiful, complicated man who'd seen something in her when she couldn't see it in herself, who'd believed in her talent before she had the courage to believe in it herself, who'd loved her not despite her struggles but because of the strength she'd found in facing them. "Yes," she whispered into the microphone, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry," Ellery said with a grin. "I couldn't hear that." The audience laughed, a warm, encouraging sound that seemed to give her permission to be completely, authentically happy in front of all these people. "Yes," she said louder, her voice ringing through the theater. "Yes, you impossible, wonderful man, yes!" The crowd erupted. 800 people on their feet, cheering and applauding and witnessing something that would become legend in Seattle's music scene. The night Gwendolyn Harland got engaged during her sold-out debut at the Paramount. Ellery climbed onto the stage, and when he slipped the ring onto her finger, Gwendolyn felt like every struggle, every rejection, every night she'd stood in the rain wondering if her dreams would ever come true, had led to this moment. "Your voice," he said, echoing the words he'd spoken in that coffee shop a lifetime ago. "My resources, our dream, she agreed, and kissed him in front of everyone. Her guitar still strapped across her body, the ring sparkling under the stage lights. When they broke apart, the audience was still cheering. But instead of feeling overwhelmed or out of place, Gwendolyn felt like she was exactly where she belonged. On a stage, sharing her truth with people who wanted to hear it, with the man she loved beside her. "Should we finish the show?" Ellery asked with a laugh. "We should definitely finish the show." She agreed. "But first, I think these people deserve to hear the song that started everything." She adjusted her guitar, found her center, and began to play the melody she'd improvised that first night in the rain. But this time, she changed the lyrics. "I was walking through the rain so long I forgot what sunshine felt like on my skin. Every door I'd knocked upon stayed locked from within, but tonight, beneath love's shelter, I remember who I'm meant to be. The woman you believe in is the woman I'm learning to see." As her voice filled the theater, reaching every corner with perfect clarity, Gwendolyn realized she'd found something more precious than fame or success or even love. She'd found herself, not the woman she thought she should be, but the woman she actually was, and that woman was finally, completely, home. 5 years later, on a rainy evening in Queen Anne, Ellery held an umbrella over his wife and daughter as they walked home from the neighborhood park. 4-year-old Melody skipped between them, her dark hair, Gwendolyn's hair, curling in the dampness, her laugh bright as music in the gray Seattle air. "Mama, sing the rain song," Melody demanded, as she did every time the weather turned wet and wonderful. Gwendolyn looked at her daughter, then at her husband, then up at the sky that had once seemed like her enemy and now felt like an old friend. She began to hum the melody that had changed everything, that simple improvisation born from desperation and hope in equal measure. Melody giggled and tried to sing along, her small voice blending with her mother's in imperfect harmony. Ellery tightened his grip on the umbrella handle, making sure his girl stayed dry, and marveled at how a single song in the rain had led to this, their small family, their shared life, proof that sometimes the most beautiful things begin with someone being brave enough to sing their truth into the storm. As they reached their front door, Gwendolyn caught Ellery's eye and smiled. He smiled back, remembering a rain-soaked night when he'd offered his umbrella to a stranger, and she'd given him a song in return. The best deals, they'd both learned, were the ones where everyone got more than they bargained for.